Imagine May 1940. French forces, dug into their positions, braced for a long, grueling war, looking back at the horrors of World War I. But what descended upon them was unthinkable. Not a German offensive, but an absolute avalanche. Tanks surged forward without pause. Infantry followed close behind, covering dozens of kilometers a day. The French were in shock, witnessing these German soldiers who seemed to need no sleep, no food, no rest. They were tireless, fearless, almost superhuman. But behind this extraordinary endurance lay a dark secret: tiny pills that turned ordinary men into war machines. How did this happen? And what price did Germany pay for such a chemical advantage? The story of Germany's chemical dependency didn't begin on the battlefields, but in the quiet, precise laboratory of a pharmaceutical company. In the late 1930s, as Europe teetered on the brink of war, a new substance emerged from the Temmler Werke in Berlin, Germany. It was here, in 1937, that German chemist Fritz Hauschild synthesized a compound that would soon reshape perceptions of human endurance and productivity: Pervitin. Pervitin was, in essence, a brand name for methamphetamine, a powerful synthetic stimulant. What made its initial release so insidious was its widespread availability. Unlike controlled substances today, Pervitin was sold freely over the counter, without a prescription, in pharmacies across Germany. It was presented to the public not as a drug with addictive potential, but as a revolutionary tonic for modern life. Pervitin's advertisements painted a picture of enhanced human potential, promising to improve concentration, alertness, and mood. Imagine billboards and magazine ads touting a pill that could dispel fatigue, sharpen the mind, and lift spirits, all without apparent consequence. This aggressive and misleading marketing ensured its uncontrolled proliferation. The general public, captivated by the promise of effortless energy and focus, had no idea they were consuming a potent narcotic. They simply saw it as a modern solution to the demands of a fast-paced, industrialized society. There were no prominent warnings about its addictive nature, psychological dependence, or the severe long-term health risks associated with methamphetamine use. Pervitin quickly became a common household item, a seemingly benign tool for coping with the daily grind, setting the stage for its far more sinister military application. Before it became the fuel for the Blitzkrieg, Pervitin had already deeply permeated the very fabric of German civilian life, transforming the daily routines of millions. Its accessibility and alluring promises made it a popular choice across various segments of society, laying bare the eagerness with which people embraced perceived shortcuts to efficiency. Factory workers, especially those churning out armaments and goods for the rapidly mobilizing nation, were among the first to embrace it. Facing demanding production quotas and grueling shifts, they turned to Pervitin to push through exhaustion, maintain focus, and increase output. The drug offered a temporary escape from physical fatigue, allowing them to work longer hours with an artificial surge of energy. Similarly, students and pupils, burdened by rigorous academic demands and the pressure of looming exams, consumed Pervitin as a study aid. They would pop pills to pull all-nighters, hoping to cram more information into their minds and maintain alertness during long revision sessions. Even housewives, grappling with the endless demands of managing a household and raising families in a society increasingly geared towards war, found appeal in Pervitin. It was marketed to them as a means to combat fatigue, lift spirits, and provide the sustained energy needed for daily chores, sometimes even disguised in popular chocolate brands. This widespread civilian adoption led to an alarming trend. Dependence developed subtly, yet rapidly. Users initially enjoyed the stimulant effects, unaware they were forming a powerful addiction. The initial boost masked the underlying fatigue and stress, creating a vicious cycle where more of the drug was needed to achieve the same effect. By the early 1940s, Pervitin was not just an occasional pick-me-up, it was firmly embedded in the daily routine of millions of Germans, a quiet epidemic silently building beneath the surface of a seemingly disciplined and industrious nation. This widespread civilian familiarity and acceptance inadvertently paved the way for its integration into the military, normalizing the idea of chemically enhanced performance. The civilian popularity of Pervitin did not escape the notice of the German military and its medical establishment, as the Nazi regime prepared for a war of unprecedented speed and brutality. Military strategists understood that conventional human endurance would be a limiting factor. This presented an opportunity for drugs like Pervitin. Driven by the need for superior soldiers, German military physicians began extensive medical tests on the drug's properties. Key figures like Dr. Otto Ranke, director of the Institute for General and Defense Physiology at Berlin's Military Medical Academy, became ardent proponents. Their research confirmed that Pervitin was remarkably effective at suppressing fatigue, alleviating hunger, dulling pain, and even diminishing fear. These were precisely the qualities sought in a fighting force expected to endure relentless combat. In 1939, Pervitin was formally approved for use in the Army, designated as a crucial stimulant. It was seen not as a drug of abuse, but as a tactical advantage, a chemical shortcut to creating the superhuman soldiers required for the regime's expansionist goals. With Pervitin officially approved, its integration into the German war machine began with the invasion of Poland in September 1939. This was the acid test for the Blitzkrieg and for the chemical enhancements intended to fuel it. The initial experiments with the drug were concentrated in the Panzertruppen tank divisions, the spearhead of the Blitzkrieg. Commanders understood that rapid, continuous armored thrusts would require unprecedented endurance from their crews. Tankers, often confined to claustrophobic spaces for days, needed to remain alert, focused, and aggressive. Pervitin seemed to offer the perfect solution. The effect on the command was nothing short of astonishing. Reports from the front detailed soldiers exhibiting incredible speed, unwavering endurance, and a heightened, almost unnatural aggression. The early successes in Poland, where German forces rapidly overwhelmed Polish defenses, were partly attributed to the relentless pace maintained by Pervitin-fueled troops. This positive feedback from the field quickly led to the creation of standardized Pervitin tablets for mass supply to the entire Wehrmacht. The pills were often provided in single-dose packs, sometimes disguised as regular rations, or distributed in vast quantities to units. The statistics from these early years are staggering. In 1939 alone, the German military ordered tens of millions of Pervitin tablets. This wasn't a cautious pilot program. It was a rapid and extensive rollout, reflecting the command's conviction that they had found a decisive edge. The initial campaigns demonstrated that Pervitin could indeed transform human limitations, creating a fighting force that appeared tireless and fearless, setting a dangerous precedent for the conflicts to come. The stage was set for its widespread application in the grandest military maneuver yet, the invasion of France. The invasion of France and the Low Countries in May 1940 marked the zenith of Pervitin's military application and its contribution to the terrifying effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg. This campaign demanded extraordinary speed and sustained effort, and Pervitin was there to provide the chemical fuel. Before the lightning assault was launched, the German army received millions of doses of Pervitin. Records indicate that 35 million doses were ordered by the Wehrmacht for the spring of 1940 alone, specifically for the Western Front. This colossal supply was distributed among the troops with clear instructions: take the pills to maintain alertness and combat fatigue during continuous operations. The results were precisely what the German High Command had hoped for, yet they were horrifyingly effective. Soldiers, pilots, and tank crews were able to move for 48 to 72 hours without sleep, pushing through exhaustion that would have crippled any conventional army. This uninterrupted momentum allowed German armored divisions to bypass the Maginot Line, pierce French defenses, and reach the English Channel with astonishing speed, effectively outflanking the Allied forces. The human cost of such relentless activity was immense, but the strategic gains were undeniable. At its peak during this campaign, Pervitin was consumed by nearly all frontline units. infantry pushing forward, tank crews operating their machines without pause, Luftwaffe pilots flying multiple sorties a day, and even staff officers maintaining round-the-clock vigilance. It became an integral, albeit unofficial, part of the Blitzkrieg tactics, transforming the very pace of war into a narcotic speed. The ability to maintain an offensive for days on end without requiring the typical rest periods broke the back of Allied resistance, leaving them bewildered and unable to mount an effective counter-strategy. The French army, expecting a protracted war of attrition, was simply overwhelmed by a force that seemed to defy human limits, unaware that much of this inhuman stamina was chemically induced. While Pervitin provided a temporary and terrifying advantage, its widespread use inevitably led to a grim harvest of shocking and devastating consequences on the front lines. The human body, forced to operate beyond its natural limits, began to break down, revealing the true cost of chemical warfare. As the initial euphoria wore off and addiction took hold, soldiers began to exhibit cases of extreme brutality, unprovoked aggression, and full-blown psychoses. Delusional episodes, paranoid outbursts, and uncontrollable rage became alarmingly common. The line between chemically induced alertness and mental instability blurred, turning soldiers into unpredictable and dangerous individuals, often to their own comrades. The physical toll was equally severe. Reports emerged of soldiers dying from sudden heart attacks in the midst of battle, their cardiovascular systems failing under the sustained strain of methamphetamine. Many others broke mentally right on the battlefield, succumbing to severe nervous breakdowns, collapsing into catatonic states, or becoming violently psychotic. These were not just isolated incidents, they were a growing trend that threatened unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. Under the influence of the drug, inhibitions plummeted, leading to increased instances of looting and violent acts against the civilian population. Soldiers, in their agitated and often dehumanized state, engaged in wanton destruction and theft, fueled by a distorted sense of reality. Anecdotes, though often difficult to verify entirely, paint a disturbing picture. Stories circulated of soldiers fighting stark naked, driven by drug-induced delirium, or individuals losing their minds entirely during marches, hallucinating enemies, or attempting self-harm. These were not the disciplined super soldiers promised by propaganda, but rather broken men living on borrowed time, their bodies and minds ravaged by the very substance meant to empower them. The illusion of chemical invincibility crumbled under the weight of these horrific human costs, highlighting the devastating price of denying natural limits. The initial euphoria and apparent invincibility provided by Pervitin inevitably gave way to a harrowing reality. As the drug wore off, soldiers experienced severe withdrawal or crash effects, turning the temporary benefits into long-term liabilities. This cycle of artificial stimulation, followed by profound collapse, created a constant struggle for those dependent on the drug. The immediate aftermath of a Pervitin dose wearing off was often marked by intense depression, vivid hallucinations, and crippling insomnia. Soldiers who had been awake for days suddenly crashed, unable to sleep despite overwhelming exhaustion, their minds plagued by disturbing visions and overwhelming despair. This made them not only ineffective but also dangerous to their own comrades. In their disoriented and agitated state, they could lash out violently, mistake allies for enemies, or simply become a liability in combat, requiring others to manage their unpredictable behavior. There were documented cases of murders, suicides, and acts of sabotage committed by soldiers experiencing severe withdrawal. The psychological torment was so profound that some chose death over the agonizing come-down. Others, in their confusion, might damage equipment or compromise positions, undermining the very war effort they were meant to serve. The disciplined, efficient German soldier was replaced by a hollowed-out, erratic addict. Military doctors constantly struggled to wean dependent soldiers off the drug, often with little success. The sheer scale of addiction meant that rehabilitation efforts were overwhelmed, and the constant demands of the front made sustained treatment impossible. Many soldiers simply remained addicted for the duration of their service, cycling through periods of artificial energy and brutal withdrawal. This widespread dependency eventually became a significant logistical and medical challenge for the Wehrmacht, draining resources and undermining troop morale and effectiveness as the initial chemical advantage turned into a debilitating burden for a fighting force increasingly consumed by its own chemical dependency. The use of powerful stimulants and narcotics was not confined to the front lines or the research labs. It permeated the highest echelons of the Nazi regime, perhaps most notably influencing Adolf Hitler himself. His personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, played a pivotal role in this dark chapter, administering a complex cocktail of drugs that profoundly impacted Hitler's decision-making and his physical and mental state as the war progressed. Morell, a somewhat controversial figure known for his unconventional treatments, became indispensable to Hitler, who put immense trust in him. From the early 1940s, and particularly after 1941, Morell's visits to Hitler became increasingly frequent, almost daily, for regular injections. The Führer was constantly plagued by various ailments, both real and psychosomatic, and Morell's drugs offered temporary relief and artificial energy. The list of substances administered to Hitler was extensive, shifting based on his perceived needs. It included Pervitin, methamphetamine, used for initial energy boosts, especially after late nights or periods of depression. Morphine and other opiates, like Eucodol, oxycodone. These powerful painkillers and mood elevators became increasingly central to Hitler's regimen, particularly after the July 20, 1944, assassination attempt left him in pain. Eucodol, a highly addictive opioid, provided intense euphoria and a detachment from reality, likely exacerbating his increasingly delusional strategic decisions. Cocaine, administered to clear his sinuses and for its stimulating effects, though less frequently than Pervitin or opiates. Barbiturates, used to calm him down or induce sleep after periods of extreme agitation or insomnia. Other substances. Morell also provided an array of vitamin injections, hormones, and various experimental compounds, creating a highly complex and dangerous drug dependency. By the final years of the war, Hitler was reportedly receiving up to 5 injections per day, a truly staggering regimen. This chronic drug use had a devastating effect on Hitler's leadership. While some historians argue that the drugs primarily masked his existing mental decline, there's little doubt they exacerbated his paranoia, irrationality, and detachment from reality. The euphoric highs followed by severe crashes likely contributed to his infamous rages, his increasingly unrealistic military orders, and his inability to accept defeat. He became a man physically trembling, mentally unstable, and dependent on a steady stream of chemicals to simply function. Beyond Hitler, drug use was also present among other high-ranking Nazi officials. Hermann Göring, for example, was a well-known morphine addict. His addiction stemmed from injuries sustained during the beer hall putsch in 1923, and it worsened significantly during the war, impacting his judgment and leadership within the Luftwaffe. While not as systematic as Hitler's regimen, the drug habits of the high command reflect a pervasive culture of chemical reliance, perhaps as a way to cope with the immense pressures, the moral decay, and the ultimate horrifying reality of their collapsing regime. When the Third Reich crumbled in 1945, the vast caches of Pervitin and other military-grade stimulants were not simply destroyed or forgotten. The formula was preserved, and the drug itself, under various guises, continued its controversial journey across the globe. Initially, in the immediate post-war years, the drug's true nature as a powerful methamphetamine was not fully understood or widely publicized, especially outside of Germany. The chemical composition was essentially retained, but its name was changed, and it often reappeared in different forms, sometimes disguised as painkillers or cold remedies with similar stimulating properties. Pharmaceutical companies, either unaware of its full destructive potential or choosing to ignore it, continued to manufacture and market similar compounds. Pervitin, or its chemical equivalent, soon found its way across the Atlantic, making its entry into the United States. There, it was adopted for a variety of purposes, often mirroring its initial civilian and military uses in Germany. It became popular among students seeking to stay awake for extended study sessions, and it was used by the military again in conflicts like the Korean and Vietnam Wars, where soldiers were given "go pills" to combat fatigue and enhance aggression. However, as the understanding of methamphetamine's severe addictive properties and devastating health consequences grew, so did public and governmental concern. Gradually, its availability was controlled, leading to its eventual prohibition in many countries. In West Germany, Pervitin remained available by prescription until 1988, highlighting how long its insidious legacy endured. Despite these bans and increasing awareness, methamphetamine, in its various illicit forms, never fully disappeared. Its dark lineage, traced back to the pharmacies and battlefields of Nazi Germany, continues to plague societies worldwide, a potent reminder of the dangerous pursuit of artificial enhancement.